Every morning at exactly 7:15, a homeless man stood outside the tallest building in the city. He never begged for money. He never held a sign. He never spoke to anyone. He simply stood across the street and watched the billionaire who owned the building. Inside that building was Daniel Carter. At 42, Daniel was one of the wealthiest businessmen in the country. He owned a company worth billions of dollars. He was respected. He was feared. And he was known for never looking back. At first, Daniel barely noticed the old man. The second morning, he wondered why he was still there. By the fifth morning, he couldn't ignore him anymore. The man was always there. Always at the same time. Always watching him. Then came a rainy Tuesday morning. Daniel stepped out of his car. His assistant opened an umbrella. But Daniel didn't move. He looked across the street. The old man was there again. Soaked by the rain. Still waiting. Daniel finally crossed the street. He stopped a few feet away. "Why do you come here every morning?" The old man looked at him. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he quietly replied, "I've been waiting for you." Daniel frowned. "Do I know you?" The old man's expression changed. Not into anger. Not into sadness. Something closer to disappointment. "You don't remember me?" Daniel shook his head. "No." The old man reached inside his coat. Daniel immediately became cautious. But instead of pulling out a weapon, the man removed a small, faded photograph. He held it toward Daniel. Daniel looked at it. And everything changed. The photograph showed three people standing in front of a small house. A young woman, a little boy, and a man standing beside them. Daniel stared at the boy. His face went pale. Because he recognized him. It was Daniel. But he was only 8 years old. "Where did you get this?" The old man didn't answer. Instead he asked, "Do you remember your mother?" Daniel swallowed. Of course he remembered her. Her name was Sarah. She had died when Daniel was 9. At least, that's what he had always been told. "My mother died when I was 9. The old man looked down. "No." Daniel froze. "What?" "She didn't die." The rain continued falling around them. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't know what to say. "My father told me she died." The old man shook his head. "Your father lied." Daniel stepped backward. "Who are you?" The old man looked directly into his eyes. "My name is Thomas." Daniel stared at him. The name meant nothing. Then Thomas said something Daniel had not heard since childhood. A sentence his mother used to whisper to him before bed. "Stars disappear in daylight, but they don't stop existing." Daniel's breathing stopped. Only his mother knew that sentence. Or at least that's what he had believed. "Where is she?" Thomas looked away. "She's alive." Daniel grabbed his arm. "Where?" Thomas gently pulled himself free. "Before I tell you, you need to understand what happened." 25 years earlier, Daniel's father, Richard Carter, had been struggling to keep his small business alive. He was deeply in debt. Daniel's mother, Sarah, wanted to leave the city with her son. She wanted a simpler life. But Richard refused. Then one night, Richard made a decision. He left Sarah. And he took Daniel with him. Sarah spent years trying to find them. But Richard made sure she couldn't. He changed addresses. He changed phone numbers. He even told Daniel that his mother had died. What? Because Richard believed Sarah was the reason he had failed. But there was something else. Sarah had discovered that Richard had been secretly taking money from the company. She had threatened to expose him. So Richard disappeared with Daniel. And Sarah was left behind. Daniel could barely process what he was hearing. "Why didn't she find me?" Thomas looked at him. "She tried." He reached into his coat again. This time he pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were dozens of letters. Letters addressed to Daniel. Letters written over many years. Daniel's hands trembled as he opened the first one. The handwriting was familiar. He had seen it before. In an old birthday card. The letter was dated 22 years earlier. It said, "My little Daniel, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I want you to know something. I never abandoned you. I looked for you. Every day. Every year. If one day you wonder whether I loved you, please remember this. I never stopped." Daniel couldn't continue reading. He closed his eyes. For years, he had believed his mother had abandoned him. He had spent his entire adult life believing that she had chosen to leave. And now he discovered that the opposite was true. She had spent her life looking for him. Hind. "Where is she?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward a small hospital across the city. "She's there." Daniel ran. He didn't care about his meeting. He didn't care about his company. He didn't care about the billions of dollars waiting for him. For the first time in his life, money meant nothing. When Daniel entered the hospital room, he saw an elderly woman sitting beside the window. Her hair was almost completely gray. Her hands were thin. But when she turned around, Daniel knew immediately. It was her. His mother. Sarah looked at him. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then she whispered, "Daniel?" He nodded. She covered her mouth and began to cry. Daniel walked toward her. "I'm sorry." Sarah shook her head. "No. I'm sorry I didn't find you." She smiled through her tears. "You were a child." Daniel sat beside her. "I thought you left me." Sarah looked at him. "Never." For the next several hours they talked. About his childhood. About the little house. About the summer they spent near the lake. About the bedtime stories she used to tell him. And slowly, memories that Daniel had buried for decades began returning. Before he left the hospital, he asked one final question. "Why didn't you contact me after I became successful?" Sarah looked toward the window. "I tried." She explained that she had found Daniel's company several years earlier. But when she called, someone told her that Daniel did not want contact with her. Daniel immediately knew what had happened. His father. Even after all those years, Richard had continued controlling the story. Daniel returned to his office the next morning. He walked directly into the records department. He discovered years of hidden documents, payments, false reports, letters, phone records, evidence that his father had deliberately separated him from his mother. But Daniel didn't seek revenge. Instead, he made a decision. He transferred a large portion of his personal fortune into a foundation dedicated to helping families reconnect after separation, abandonment, and financial hardship. And he gave Thomas a job. Not because Thomas needed money, but because Daniel wanted the man who had carried those letters for 25 years to finally know that his patience had mattered. Months later, Daniel returned to the same street where he had first seen Thomas. But this time, Thomas wasn't standing outside the building. He was sitting inside Daniel's office. Daniel placed the old photograph on his desk. "You could have told me who you were from the beginning." Thomas smiled. "I wanted you to remember your mother before you learned to hate your father." Daniel looked at him. Then he understood. Thomas hadn't been waiting outside the building for money. He had been waiting for the right moment. The moment Daniel was finally ready to hear the truth. And sometimes, the people who seem to have nothing are carrying something priceless. A memory, a promise, or a truth that can change someone's entire life. Daniel spent years believing he had lost his mother. But the truth was much simpler. She had never stopped waiting for him. And sometimes, the greatest wealth in the world isn't money. It's having someone who never gives up on you.